Hey everyone, and welcome to this podcast. So we've been looking at Dietrich Bonhoeffer's letters and papers from prison, focusing on the idea of religionless faith. And I want to take a little bit of a detour now. We're going to come back to Bonhoeffer. We still have to finish a few of the letters, especially where he talks about the church. But I'm currently on a pilgrimage in Italy, walking the way of St. Francis. And the way of St. Francis starts in Florence, moves through a place called Laverna, where Francis experiences the stigmata, and then it moves down into Assisi, and then from Assisi to Rome. And for the last 8 years, 9 years, every other year, I've taken students on a pilgrimage where we start in Assisi and we spend some time there. And then we make our way to Rome. We don't walk the whole way. There are parts of it that you're kind of walking through fields. So we focus on the places that are specific to Francis, where he spent a bit of time. And there are things, we can look at and talk about. And it's a fascinating experience. And it's an experience that's really gotten me thinking about this idea of religionless faith. Because immersing yourself in the kind of medieval Catholic world of St. Francis, you recognize that pilgrimage, the idea of pilgrimage, is grounded in a particular social imaginary. So there's a way of thinking about the world in which the supernatural or the transcendent world engages or interacts with the natural. As Charles Taylor in A Secular Age talks about it, the line between the two is porous. And so material objects can contain grace or special powers of transcendence. And that makes, so in that context, a pilgrimage makes perfect sense. You go to a place where a holy person was, and being in that space will open you up to particular experiences of healing and grace and so on. And this is still a way in which the Catholic Church thinks about the world. The Orthodox Church, you can maybe even talk about certain Pentecostals who have this kind of framework. The question, though, for me is, as we think about the changing social imaginary, and this is what Taylor is trying to do in A Secular Age, in the changing social imaginary is how do we make sense of spirituality in the context of an immanent frame, where that line between the transcendent and the immanent, between the world of God and the material world becomes thickened or hard. It's no longer permeable. And then how do we make sense of pilgrimage in that context? So the story I always tell is we were in Rome, and I was with a group of mostly Protestant students, although there was one Roman Catholic student. And we were at this particular church where they had a piece of the cross and some nails from the crucifixion of Jesus. And as we were going up to see this, you can imagine a little bit of the Protestant skepticism that comes in, where it's like, oh, is this really the cross? Are they really the nails? And so on. But as we got closer to the room in which these things were held, it was, we could hear the sounds of singing. We could hear the sounds of weeping. And when we walked in, there was a group of Asian Christians. I'm not sure where they were from, but they were in front of this piece of cross. They were venerating it, and they were weeping, and they were crying, and they were singing, and they were praying. And what was interesting was the response of my Protestant students, who were looking at this like it's an entirely foreign world. I mean, how do you make sense of it? And we had the same experience when we went to we were at St. John the Lateran, with the church across the street that has the stairs, or the place across the street that has the steps that supposedly Jesus stood on, and Helen, Constantine's mother, went to the Palestine and got all these different artifacts and brought them back. And we happened to be there when they took off they have these plastic covers on them because they were cleaning them. And so we actually got to see the actual steps that, according to the people there, have the blood of Jesus on them. And so people go up these steps on their knees, confessing their sins and so on. And this is something that Luther himself did. And my students, again, were very skeptical. And it just has got me thinking about pilgrimage and spirituality in the context of a secular age. How do we make sense of spirituality in a social imaginary that increasingly cuts us off from these experiences of transcendence? Now, what's interesting is what Bonhoeffer is suggesting is that this is the world come of age. And so we can't necessarily go back or put the genie back in the bottle, even though there are people in the world who still hold these different perspectives. But then it forces those of us who believe, who are Christians and who believe that there's a place for Christian spirituality. Like, how do we interpret now these practices in this new paradigm? And that's where I find Bonhoeffer to be helpful, but that's also where I find Francis to be helpful. Now, I want to be careful because I'm not trying to make Francis into, a 21st century fill in the blank. I understand that Francis lived in the medieval world, and so he was a part of that world in which grace and divinity flowed through the world and the sacraments, and he was a part of the church and the institutional church. But I think there are parts of his story that and things that he did and ways in which he did them that can translate into this religionless faith perspective that I'm trying to think through here with Bonhoeffer. And we can see how symbolically some of the things that Francis does can fit into this. The idea of stripping himself of his clothes and giving them to his father, kind of letting go of a prior life and being opened up to a new way of life, of simplicity, for example. But also, and this is what I want to talk briefly about today, the idea of the stigmata, which in and of itself seems very grounded in kind of, what Taylor would refer to as the social imaginary of transcendence, in which the transcendent world is breaking into the materiality. So I understand that that's a part of this narrative. But I think there's also a way of thinking about what it means to become Christ-like and what the stigmata represents. So my daughter and I are on this pilgrimage, and part of it is I'm on sabbatical to write a book and to think through this religionless faith stuff. And so we stayed in this little village just below Laverna, and we walked up the trail, took the woods, and we could see the signs of the wild boar. We actually saw some wild boar in the evening. We were coming back from dinner, a whole herd of them. But we went into the monastery up there. So there's a Franciscan monastery that's developed on Laverna, on this mountain, and where he received the stigmata. And what they do at 3:00 every day is there's a service that is held where they do a pilgrimage and they move out to the spot where he got the stigmata. So they start in this chapel or this church, and then they move out. And it's a very, very moving service. This is the second time that I've been there. And it starts with this like a liturgical prayer, and then the brothers come out with the cross, and they begin to sing and chant about the hands and the feet upon which Francis received the mark. And then as they process out, all of the people follow. We move over to this little chapel, and we go kind of 2 by 2 down this long hallway. It used to be outside, but they want to make sure that they can get there in the wintertime. So they put it, built a hallway, and it's just very moving. And that's what has me thinking then about the practice of pilgrimage, this movement, and thinking about what it means to be shaped into the humanity of Jesus Christ. How do we participate in the suffering? What does it mean to receive the mark of Christ upon us? Now, for Francis, that was a very real thing, and I'm not here to deny that or question it. But for those of us who grow up in more of an immanent frame, where it's harder to wrap our minds around these types of experiences, how do we translate or communicate this experience, especially I'm thinking about the lives of young people. We had this fascinating experience where we were taking a bus. This is after Laverna, and the weather was bad, so we couldn't go up the next segment. We couldn't walk it because it's dangerous when the weather's bad. There's thunderstorms and rain and so on. So we got on a bus, and we just happened to come to this place where young people had just gotten done with school. These Italian kids, and they're sitting there, and they're smoking, and all of them on their phones, and of course, there's this kind of ritual of, male-female thing going on. And they were very Western, secular. And I thought about, what does stigmata mean for them? Or how would it translate for those students? Now, some of them maybe are Catholic and religious and so on, and I'm not saying that, trying to judge them based upon their seeing them or watching them or whatever. But it just got me thinking about that kind of translation. How do we translate these experiences? And then what happened for me is every year what happens when I take college students on this trip, again, very Protestant and so on, and we walk. And we get tired and we get angry and we get frustrated and sore and all of these types of things. Inevitably, at the end of this trip, we have a final dinner together in Rome, usually right outside the Vatican somewhere. And I don't seek this out, but what ends up happening is there's an outpouring that takes place. Joy, things they're looking forward to, grief, struggles, anxiety, all of these things. I don't ask for it. We're sitting around the table eating together. I ask them about their experience on the trip, and something gets dislodged in this process of pilgrimage. And so for me, that's what I want to explore in thinking about religionless faith. It's not to deny the experiences of Catholics, Orthodox, Pentecostals, whomever. There are still Christians for whom this divine reality is still, at work in the world in ways that medieval Christians maybe would have recognized. But increasingly, more and more people have been shaped by the immanent frame, as Taylor puts it. And so how do we translate these things? What is the purpose of a Christian pilgrimage for my Protestant kids who they look with suspicion upon somebody saying this is the cross or these are the nails or whatever? That to me is the importance of this work, and I think you can see it with Bonhoeffer. And I definitely believe we can see it with St. Francis. And there are things about the Franciscan narrative or the story of St. Francis that I find to be extremely powerful. And I started with the stigmata because that's where we started. And I haven't had Wi-Fi, so I haven't been able to do this, but we're now in Gubbio. And in Gubbio is the place where Francis makes peace between the wolf and the townspeople. And it happens at a time in Francis's life where he's kind of quit being the head of the order. Like he develops this following and creates this order, and they make him in charge, and he's just not very good at it, and things get a little bit out of hand, and so he quits. He's done, and he comes to Gubbio, and it's here where there's this wolf that is kind of preying upon the people of Gubbio, and Francis comes and makes peace between them. And so there's a statue down as you come into the city, or the old part of the city, I should say. And there's the Church of St. Francis that is there. And it's these narratives where people might say, oh, yeah, right, really, he talked to a wolf, or he preached to a wolf, or he preached to birds, and so on. And people want to turn him into this kind of garden variety saint, if that makes sense, or you put him out in the garden and it's all peace, love, and birds chirping. But there's so much more to him than that. And I think that there's much about his narrative that can resonate with in the lives of young people for whom their worldview is part of the immanent frame. And part of this is going to be redefining poverty, a stripping away. How do we help young people strip away some of the ideological things that are at work now in this world, including religion, and including those who want to use religion to kind of beat people over the head and funnel everybody into kind of the same way of life and so on. Francis, I think, offers us a way forward. So in these next few days, I want to explore that a little bit. And when I get a chance with Wi-Fi, I'll try to do one of these podcasts and load it up. But for now, just to leave you with a sense of what Francis, who Francis is and calls us to, I just want to read just a little bit here from Richard Rohr, who writes this. He quotes Johann Baptist Metz about suffering. He said, and this is Metz's quote: "Might the authority of those who suffer bring the diverse culture and social worlds together." And then this is Rohr's take on it. "I believe this profound question about suffering from a modern German theologian succinctly and precisely expresses the religious breakthrough that Christ has offered humanity. It is also foundational to an understanding the unique Franciscan view of the world. True gospel authority, the authority to heal and renew things in people, is not finally found in a hierarchical office, a theological argument, a perfect law, or a rational explanation. What the crucified has revealed to the world is that the real authority that authors people and changes the world is an inner authority that comes from people who have lost, let go, and are refound on a new level."